Imagine holding in your hands a book so mysterious, so shrouded in secrecy and controversy, that entire generations have debated whether it holds the keys to higher spiritual truths or the doorway to dangerous forbidden knowledge. Before we even begin, make sure to subscribe and stay with us until the end, because what you are about to hear is not the ordinary story of an old manuscript. It is the story of a text called Shams al-Ma'arif, translated as the Sun of Knowledge, a book often whispered about in the shadows of Islamic history. For centuries, it has been referred to as everything from a guide to divine wisdom to a cursed manual of sorcery. And yet, it continues to fascinate seekers, mystics, and even those who dare to walk the edge of the unknown. This book has been blamed for dangerous rituals, feared as a tool of black magic, and yet admired by some for its deep spiritual insight. How did a single book earn such a powerful reputation? How did it come to be known as one of the most dangerous and controversial works in the entire Islamic world? To understand that, we must look not just at the book itself, but also at the man most often associated with its creation, Ahmad ibn Ali al-Buni. Ahmad al-Buni lived during the 13th century, a period when Islamic scholarship was thriving, particularly in the fields of mathematics, astronomy, spirituality, and metaphysics. He was a Sufi mystic from North Africa, a scholar deeply immersed in the esoteric sciences, those mysterious branches of knowledge concerned with the hidden spiritual dimensions of reality. Most Sufi masters of his era passed on their knowledge orally, from teacher to student, ensuring that only those with proper spiritual discipline could access it. But al-Buni was different. He dared to write down teachings that many would have kept secret, including those involving the spiritual meanings of divine names, the mystical uses of numbers, and insights into the unseen. However, and this is critical to understand, the Shams al-Ma'arif that exists today is not the same as what al-Buni originally wrote. What people now pass around in secret, in PDF files online, or hidden in private collections, has been edited, added to, and altered by later generations long after al-Buni's death. His authentic work, intended for a select group of spiritually advanced disciples, was transformed over the centuries into something more sensational, more dangerous, and far removed from what he may have envisioned. Al-Buni himself warned against the misuse of these teachings. In one famous statement attributed to him, he declared, "Shame upon the one who holds this book of mine and reveals it to the unworthy, to the stranger who does not understand." His writings, he insisted, were meant only for elite Sufis capable of grasping their deep spiritual meanings. However, as history has shown time and again, secret knowledge often falls into the wrong hands. What was once a book of mystical reflection and advanced Sufi practice was eventually expanded into a manual containing rituals for summoning jinn, creating talismans, invoking celestial entities, and manipulating unseen forces of the universe. And that, perhaps, is where the real danger lies, not in al-Buni's original ideas, but in how later interpreters transformed them into something many Islamic scholars now view as outright sorcery. To truly appreciate the shock of this evolution, imagine the world of medieval Islamic scholarship. This was a time when intellectual and spiritual exploration reached unprecedented heights, with scholars studying mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy alongside theology and law. Within this environment, esoteric knowledge, the hidden sciences that dealt with spiritual symbols, the deeper meanings of letters and numbers, and the unseen connections between the physical and spiritual world had an ambiguous status. Some considered it a noble pursuit, a way to achieve a deeper understanding of God's creation. Others condemned it outright as forbidden magic, a perilous path that led believers astray. Ahmad al-Buni stood right at the center of this debate. He is believed to have spent much of his life in Egypt, a hub of scholarship and mysticism, where various spiritual and occult traditions were circulating. It was here, surrounded by both mainstream Islamic thought and the whispers of esoteric knowledge, that he compiled his works. These writings blended traditional Sufi concepts with mystical cosmology, the power of divine names, and the mysterious significance of letters and numbers. But again, his approach was spiritual, aimed at achieving higher states of awareness and closeness to God. The goal was knowledge and transformation, not worldly power. Over time, however, this distinction was blurred. Later, editors and compilers of Shams al-Ma'arif began to add rituals, invocations, and practices that went far beyond al-Buni's intentions, pushing the text into the realm of magic and forbidden arts. This evolution explains why the book's reputation became so controversial. For many believers, anything involving summoning spiritual entities, crafting talismans, or invoking supernatural forces crosses a dangerous line. In Islamic law, practices involving sorcery and manipulation of jinn are explicitly condemned. Yet Shams al-Ma'arif, in its modern form, is filled with exactly these instructions. This is why scholars often label it a cursed book, one that ordinary people should avoid. It is also why, even today, some copies are banned, hidden, or kept secret, accessible only to those willing to risk both spiritual and societal consequences. But why has it endured? Why do people still seek it out? The answer lies partly in human nature. Whenever knowledge is forbidden, people become even more curious. And Shams al-Ma'arif promises what many secretly desire: power, protection, love, wealth, influence over unseen forces. To some, it offers the ultimate shortcut way to bypass ordinary effort and tap directly into the universe's hidden structure. For others, it is simply a fascinating piece of history, a relic of a time when the boundary between mysticism and magic was razor thin. Whatever the reason, this book continues to draw attention, sparking debates among scholars, mystics, and the curious alike. In the following chapters, we will delve into the contents of this enigmatic work, its impact on centuries of spiritual and magical practice, and why it continues to evoke both fear and fascination in equal measure. But always remember, what you are hearing is not just about an ancient text. It is about a legacy of secret knowledge, a story about what happens when the pursuit of divine understanding is mixed with the temptation to control the unseen. And, as you will soon discover, the consequences can be far more dangerous than most people ever imagine. The story of Shams al-Ma'arif becomes even more complicated when we begin to understand how it moved from a book meant for spiritual elites to one feared and avoided by the majority of the Islamic world. Ahmad al-Buni himself never intended for his teachings to become public tools for summoning jinn or manipulating unseen forces for personal gain. He envisioned his work as a guide for the most advanced Sufi practitioners, those who had already dedicated their lives to spiritual discipline and self-purification. The text was initially focused on achieving closeness to God through a deeper understanding of divine names, spiritual cosmology, and the mystical meanings of letters and numbers. It was not a book for merchants seeking wealth, politicians seeking power, or treasure hunters looking to control spirits. However, as history has shown, when secret knowledge falls into the hands of the unprepared, it often evolves into something far more perilous than initially intended. Over time, Shams al-Ma'arif evolved from a spiritual text to a manual for magical practices, rituals, and talismans designed to control or influence both the physical and spiritual worlds. This shift is where the controversy begins to burn like a fire that never goes out. For centuries, scholars and religious leaders have debated the nature of esoteric knowledge. In Sufi traditions, specific invocations, chants, and meditations are permitted and even encouraged as they focus on divine remembrance and spiritual awakening. However, the moment a practice crosses into commanding spiritual beings or manipulating worldly outcomes through supernatural means, it is often condemned as sorcery. Shams al-Ma'arif sits right on that dividing line, making it either a treasure of mystical wisdom or a cursed guide to forbidden magic, depending on who you ask. The book contains detailed instructions on crafting amulets and talismans using Quranic verses, divine names, and celestial symbols. It teaches how to arrange letters and numbers in specific ways to invoke certain effects, how to create protective charms, and even how to call upon unseen entities for assistance. For a deeply devout Muslim, these actions can feel dangerously close to shirk, the act of associating partners with God, which is considered one of the gravest sins in Islam. But what exactly are these occult sciences found inside the pages of this mysterious book? Shams al-Ma'arif is a blend of several intellectual traditions prevalent in the medieval Islamic world, often meeting with controversy. One of them is numerology, the idea that numbers and their relationships can reveal hidden truths about reality and can be used to influence events. Another is astrology, the belief that the positions of celestial bodies affect earthly events and human destiny. Then there is talismanic magic, where specific symbols, names of God, and Quranic verses are inscribed in a precise way to create charms thought to bring protection, love, power, or prosperity. Letter mysticism, known as the science of huruf, analyzes the Arabic alphabet for spiritual meanings, believing each letter carries cosmic significance. Combined, these practices form a web of mystical knowledge that can either be used to pursue divine understanding or to manipulate reality itself. The book goes beyond abstract theory. It includes diagrams, symbols, and actual step-by-step instructions for performing rituals. Some sections deal with invoking angels, while others focus on summoning jinn, powerful beings created from smokeless fire, according to Islamic theology. In the wrong hands, these practices are hazardous, both spiritually and physically, as many believe that summoning jinn can have unpredictable and destructive consequences. This is why so many scholars, both historically and today, strongly advise against even opening the book. The Shams al-Ma'arif does not simply hint at mystical practices. It explicitly describes how to perform them, and that makes it one of the most feared and condemned texts in Islamic history. It is essential to understand the context in which all this knowledge was developed. During the medieval period, the boundaries between science, spirituality, and magic were less rigid than they are today. Astronomy often existed alongside astrology, mathematics alongside numerology, and medicine alongside spiritual healing practices. Many scholars believed that understanding the unseen aspects of the world was part of understanding God's creation. However, Islamic orthodoxy maintained a strict stance against attempting to control or manipulate spiritual beings, because it was believed to interfere with divine will and could lead to corruption of the soul. Shams al-Ma'arif represents this tension perfectly. For some, it is simply a text of spiritual knowledge written in the language of its time. For others, it is a forbidden guide to black magic, one that tempts people with promises of power and control. And this is where things get even more intriguing, because not everyone who studied the book sought power or wealth. Some saw it as a way to reach higher states of consciousness, to break through the illusions of the material world and experience a direct connection with divine truth. This pursuit of Ma'rifah, direct knowledge of God, is a central goal of Sufi mysticism. Many of the invocations and rituals described in Shams al-Ma'arif can be understood as tools for transcending ordinary reality and achieving spiritual awakening. Yet, even with the purest intentions, the methods outlined in the book blur the line between worship and sorcery, leaving even devout mystics uncertain whether they are walking the path of divine illumination or stepping into forbidden territory. This blurred line has created a legacy of fear and fascination. Some Muslims see the book as cursed, believing that even owning it can bring misfortune or spiritual harm. Others see it as a misunderstood work, corrupted by centuries of additions and misinterpretations. The debate over its legitimacy continues to this day, but one thing is sure: Shams al-Ma'arif is not just another historical manuscript. It is a symbol of the enduring human desire for hidden knowledge and power, as well as the risks that accompany the pursuit of it. In the coming moments, we will explore not only what this book teaches, but also what it represents in the broader story of Islamic mysticism and forbidden arts. We will explore why it continues to spark intense debate, why some individuals still seek it out despite warnings, and why others consider it so dangerous that they avoid it at all costs. Most importantly, we will examine how a single book managed to straddle the fine line between spiritual enlightenment and the dark temptation of supernatural control, a line that countless seekers have crossed, often with life-changing consequences. The reputation of Shams al-Ma'arif might have remained confined to libraries, whispered about only among mystics and scholars, if not for the strange events that brought it back into the headlines of modern times. One incident in particular shocked the Islamic world and reinforced the book's reputation as a dangerous one. In 2021, authorities in Egypt arrested one of the country's most prominent businessmen, Hassan Ratib, for financing an illegal network of artifact smugglers. These were not ordinary criminals, they were a gang that specialized in uncovering buried treasures, some of which had been hidden for centuries. What startled investigators was not just the sheer number of artifacts the gang had found, but how they were able to locate them so precisely when many were buried in locations even archaeologists had struggled to map. During the raid, the authorities uncovered a peculiar item among the gang's belongings, a worn, old manuscript identified as Shams al-Ma'arif. The gang confessed to something that sounded more like a story than a police report. They admitted to using rituals from the book to summon JINN, supernatural beings mentioned in the Quran, who they believed guided them to buried treasures. They spoke of using substances like red mercury, known in occult circles as a mystical medium, to make contact with these entities and obtain knowledge beyond human ability. This revelation electrified the media and religious authorities alike, reigniting debate over the Shams al-Ma'arif and whether it should even exist in circulation. The gang's methods, blending forbidden rituals with criminal activity, were viewed by many as proof that the book's dangerous reputation was well-deserved. To others, it was a tragic example of what happens when spiritual knowledge is stripped of its ethical context and repurposed for worldly gain. In the end, the gang was imprisoned, but the questions that remained were chilling. How many others were quietly using this book for similar purposes? How many still believe that invoking the powers within its pages can bend reality itself? The incident also led to a surge in online searches for the book as curiosity took over and people wanted to know what could be written in a manuscript that could influence such events. Scholars stepped forward to clarify that the original work of Ahmad al-Buni was far less concerned with treasure hunting and far more focused on deep spiritual symbolism and Sufi philosophy. The version discovered with the artifact smugglers, however, was not the original. Instead, it was a later compilation that had evolved over centuries, including teachings and rituals never authored by al-Buni himself. This highlights an essential truth about the Shams al-Ma'arif. What people read today is not a single book by one man, but rather a patchwork of writings from different sources, stitched together into something that carries al-Buni's name, yet strays far from his original intent. This misunderstanding of authorship has permanently changed al-Buni's legacy. While some still remember him as a respected Sufi scholar, for many, his name is now synonymous with occult practices and black magic. The book that he once intended to be a guide for spiritually mature disciples became, over the centuries, a public curiosity and a forbidden tool for those seeking power, wealth, or supernatural influence. By the 17th century, the expanded versions of Shams al-Ma'arif, circulating in manuscript form, were far more concerned with the practical application of rituals than with philosophical reflection. These later texts included detailed instructions for crafting magical talismans, invoking spiritual entities, and manipulating cosmic forces to achieve worldly results. It is this version of the text that has persisted, reproduced in print, and now digitized on the internet, often accompanied by warnings about its supposed curses and dangers. For many scholars, this is a tragedy. They argue that Ahmad al-Buni's original writings were deeply rooted in the spiritual worldview of Islamic mysticism, where the primary goal was to achieve closeness to God and undergo self-transformation. His work explored how the letters of the Arabic alphabet, divine names, and spiritual symbols could deepen one's understanding of the universe and divine order. But when others added rituals intended to summon beings, control outcomes, or manipulate spiritual energies for personal gain, it fundamentally altered the nature of the work. Now, instead of being remembered as a text of high Sufi thought, Shams al-Ma'arif is remembered by most people as a cursed manual of sorcery. Even so, the fascination with the book has only grown in modern times. The internet has made it widely available, often in PDF format, allowing readers from around the world to access it with just a few clicks. This has created a new wave of controversy. Religious authorities regularly warn believers to avoid the text entirely, pointing out that it contains names of jinn and detailed instructions for dangerous rituals that, according to Islamic teaching, can lead to spiritual harm or open the door to demonic influence. Stories circulate online about individuals who experimented with the book only to experience strange misfortunes, eerie happenings, or a profound sense of spiritual unease. Whether these stories are superstition or evidence of real danger, they have only deepened the book's dark reputation. Despite these warnings, some modern seekers continue to view Shams al-Ma'arif as a legitimate source of spiritual insight. They argue that if approached with the right intention and proper knowledge, the text can reveal more profound truths about the relationship between the seen and unseen worlds. For these individuals, the book is not inherently dangerous, but rather in how it is used. This argument, however, rarely convinces mainstream scholars who see the risks as far outweighing any potential benefits, especially for people without the spiritual training and discipline that Ahmad al-Buni initially demanded of his students. This leads us to the broader legacy of Shams al-Ma'arif, legacy defined by both awe and fear. For some, it represents a doorway to higher wisdom, an example of humanity's eternal hunger for secret knowledge and spiritual mastery. For others, it is a cautionary tale, a warning about what happens when powerful knowledge is taken out of context and misused. Whether one sees it as a treasure or a curse, the book occupies a unique space in history. It continues to inspire scholarly debates, spiritual fascination, and, in some cases, outright fear. And perhaps this is why, centuries after its creation, Shams al-Ma'arif remains so influential. It forces us to confront one of humanity's oldest dilemmas. Should all knowledge be shared freely,